Before we get very far into our next story, we do have a warning for you tonight. What you're about to see and hear may not be suitable for children. Tonight, take a walk in their world.
Transpicuous news, connecting the dots between the lines.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Transpicuous News. Yeah, you know what? December has got to be the most screwed up month we've had so far. Now, I didn't put out a news video last week because basically the news got away from me, and by the time I realized it was like, this isn't even possible to put into a news and organize it into a cohesive show. So I just put it all down in writing. All the links, I published those about 3 days ago. And I thought, I'll have a few days before I need to go and actually record something. Yeah, no, because basically overnight, the world did a flip again. And I just love when the world does those flips. When no one's looking, it's like, oh my God, seriously. So, I'm really not sure what plane of existence we're on anymore. But we're going to do a little rundown. So for those of you who didn't read the first half of December's news that I put out all the links to, we'll just give you a brief rundown, just because it'll put some of the stuff we're going to talk about tonight into a little bit of better perspective. Are you ready? Okay, so let's review the first half of December. So, the US bombs Syrian army in Syria and kills 4 Syrian soldiers. No Western media covers this, of course. Yeah, Assad was rather upset, was threatening to go to the UN Security Council. Yeah, not very happy. Now, follow this one. We got a few interesting ones coming out of Europe here. The German government votes to participate in the ISIS strikes in Syria. Germany publicly warns Saudi Arabia against further financing of religious radicals globally. The article, like I said, you may want to go look it up, rather telling, as they name it, the Wahhabist brand of religion coming out of Saudi Arabia that's financing all the building of all the mosques all over the world, which they're then using to recruit radicals to become ISIS. Kind of interesting. Yeah, it was a good one. Turkey invaded Iraq. 100 troops equipped with tanks and artillery, and apparently they're building a secret landing strip, Air Force base there as well. And Iraq's response was, get the fuck out. Then Iraq told the next day US troops to get the fuck out. Then Syria told the US troops to get the fuck out. Yeah, it was interesting. Now, as on the whole US military might scene, little rundown, okay, just a little bit of news here. So we know the US, the F-35 fighter jet is a complete disaster. It's a piece of crap. Raytheon's GPS control system was announced to be a disaster. That is a direct quote from the Pentagon. They called it a disaster. And the newest US Navy warship has systems failure on its maiden voyage in the first 20 miles. It has to be towed back to harbor. So, yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's all like fake propaganda, but US military is not doing so well at the moment. And they're spending more money than anyone else in the world kind of combined. One of the big ones, and it was a thud moment for me. The IMF publicly announces that it is canceling the Ukraine's debt to Russia, $3 billion debt to Russia. And literally it's jaw on the floor, like, the IMF just canceled a sovereign debt that had nothing to do with them. They weren't involved in this debt in any way, shape, or form. This was directly between Russia and the Ukraine, and the IMF just decides to cancel it. Needless to say, Putin not very happy about this. I can't imagine why. So, and keep track of these guys. We got more on all these. Italy joins France in a call to end Russian sanctions. Yes, keep that one in mind too, my friends, because it's all going to play a big part. So next up, let's see, what else? Oh, Yemen bombs, Yemen forces, yeah, they're getting kind of, how do we say, uppity. Yeah, uppity is a good word. We're going to call it, they're getting kind of uppity, and they've been doing a lot of shit recently, and none of the Western media is talking about it, of course. So Yemen forces bomb Saudi coalition base, kill 140 military, including 42 Blackwater mercenaries that were hired by the United Arab Emirates. They've also blown up 2 Saudi destroyers in the Strait last week, which brings their total sinkages up to 11. Yeah, Saudi's on the verge of going bust. It was announced that October they had the lowest bank deposits in the history of Saudi, and that their banks are now in pretty much complete panic mode, because it's like, holy shit, now what do we do? You know, kind of doing their borrow from Peter to pay Paul. That's basically what they're doing right now. And of course, one of the big news, the UN Paris climate change, absolute frickin' circus. They have all agreed that they're going to spend $16 trillion to fight climate change. And of course, my first question is, oh, so who owns the companies who are going to make this $16 trillion? Because if they're going to spend $16 trillion, then someone's obviously going to earn $16 trillion. So who owns the companies? I think that should be someone's research project, really. Germany, going back to Germany, has refused to share intel with Turkey. Of course, Germany is going into Syria and doing airstrikes against ISIS, and they refuse to allow any intel to go to Turkey. Again, I can't imagine why. But this is a big deal because, of course, 2 NATO nations not talking to each other. China calls for the end of the Cold War era NATO. And again, it was a rather interesting article, the statements that came out of China about NATO's purpose. Oh yes, some teenage hackers discovered that 3 or 4 ISIS media accounts, when they tracked down the IP addresses, led them to the British government. Yeah, they were being run out of the British government. I can't imagine how that happened either. And of course, the UK is trying to make excuses. No, we sold those IP addresses to someone, but we just haven't changed the links or something. So it just looks like it's the British government who's running these ISIS media accounts. It's all there in black and white, folks. Trust me, that's right out of the mainstream media. Big one. Not much being said on this. No regime change in Syria. Kerry, of course, who is in Russia, accepts the Russian stance on Assad, saying, okay, well, we'll work with you. We're going to work with the Russians, the US. And we're not going to push Assad out. We're going to stop trying to push Assad out. Right, sure, we believe that. And the best one came out, I believe it was Thursday, no, Wednesday, when the Turkish government announced we can occupy Russia in 7 days, as long as we have NATO with us. And I laughed so hard, I just about fell off my chair. I thought that was the funniest thing. So it was like, I don't know, maybe you want to talk to like Hitler and Napoleon before you try that one. Yeah. So that's our little review. Just to put things that we're going to talk about now into a bit of perspective. Okay, are you ready? Here we go. So, of course, the big news that came out 2 days ago is, you know, that low-life scumbag who bought the AIDS medicine and then jacked up the price by like 5,000%, and everyone hated him. Well, he's just been arrested for security fraud. Now, folks, distraction. 100% distraction. The whole story, when it came out the first time, was nothing but a distraction. So, yeah, what are they trying to distract you from in the social media realms? Oh, let's just find out, shall we? So, we're going to take a quick pause over in Canada. Justin Trudeau, you know, the haughty Prime Minister of Canada, he put a heartfelt plea out because of, you know, the commission, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission has just been made public, their final report about, you know, the atrocities and the genocide, let's face it, let's call it what it was, genocide against First Nations people in Canada. And Justin Trudeau is going to go to the Pope and tell him, you need to apologize. The Vatican needs to apologize. And this, again, is also a fucking distraction, because it's really, he didn't say anything about Queen Elizabeth. Is he going to go to Queen Elizabeth, you know, as head of the Church of England, who committed just as many crimes as the Vatican? Did the Canadian government actually do a real apology? You know, like, not Harper, like, yeah, we're sorry. And really, flowery words? I don't know. Money talks, doesn't it? I really think that maybe the Church of England and the Vatican and the British government and the Canadian government should maybe fork out some cold, hard cash. Yeah, I mean, other than like the $372 so far per victim, those ones who've actually passed through the whole tribunal process and had to relive the horror of what they went through, and to be judged whether or not they could be vindicated in getting their $350 odd fucking dollars that the Canadian government paid them. Yeah. So, needless to say, it's a little bit of a sore spot with me. So yeah, Justin, you're gonna have to cry me a little bit of a bigger river before I fall for this one. And of course, big news in the States. Oh, Congress is voting on a $1.1 trillion bill. $1.1 trillion for a year. Plus, sorry, 1.1 trillion plus 629 billion in tax cuts. Now, the only reason I actually included this one is just because I love the Cialis ad. Because really, when you're talking about Congress, I think an ad for pills for erectile dysfunction is very applicable. So yeah, of course, you know, they always sneak shit into these bills. I mean, it's a 2,000-page omnibus bill that apparently congressmen had 48 hours to read from cover to cover and fully understand and comprehend. So obviously, none of them read it, because they never do. And what's hidden in there is the new surveillance bill. Now, you may remember, I think it was in early November, there was an article that came out of the States about how there was this Supreme Court justice had overturned NSA spying bill, law, whatever, and said no, and the alternative media all went, yay, look, we're winning, this judge is vindicating us. And I looked at it and went, no, he's not. Do you not hear what the judge said? The judge said, besides, the new surveillance bill is coming out the end of this year, so we don't need to worry about this one. And so they don't, because the surveillance bill, here, I'll give you a couple of quotes off of it here. It says, basically, critics like Wyden say removing those protections would turn internet backbone companies into de facto surveillance organs. Even more invasive than previous versions, stripping out crucial provisions that prevented direct information sharing with the NSA. This bill was never intended to prevent cybersecurity. it's a disingenuous attempt at quietly expanding the US government's surveillance programs. That's what just got passed about 6 hours ago today. Yes, 1.1 trillion of money they don't have. And guess what? A brand new surveillance bill. So we're going to need to really look into this one. Now, another little twist, and this goes into what I talked about a little bit on the last Transpicuous News, how there's a shift going on, and allegiances seem to be shifting. So the US decided that what they were going to do, they're thinking of going ahead with plans to impose visas for some members of the bloc who are currently part of the visa waiver program, i.e. the European Union. Basically, if someone from the European Union goes to a place that the US doesn't like, i.e. Syria, Iraq, Iran, any place like that, they can deny them access into the US and demand that they have to get a visa and go through a whole visa process to come into the US. Well, the EU has just said, yeah, if you do that, we're going to smack visa rules on every American coming into the European Union. So those are some strongly stated words. And again, kind of indicative of some of the shifting that we're seeing going on at the moment. Now, if you want a laughable document, UN Security Council unanimously adopts resolution targeting ISIS finances. Now, if this is ever the biggest document full of bluster, hot air, and says absolutely nothing, I don't know what is. For example, key objectives of the new resolution, according to Churkin, is the enforcement of a framework to reveal and disrupt illegal financing of ISIS and groups related to it by means of trade in oil, artifacts, and other illegal sources. Which leads me to ask the question, disrupt illegal financing? So if someone's financing them legally, i.e., maybe fully sanctioned finances, does that mean they don't have to follow these new UN Security Council rules? And it's also very, very interesting. Again, you had a statement that the US stands ready to work with Russia from Kerry. Very interesting. So yeah, UN, lots of talk, lots of hot air, and not a hell of a lot of anything else. Let's see. Oh, now, going back to Germany again. What we did in the review, what we talked about. Germany is now set to cooperate with Assad and set up the first European country's intel agency in Damascus to work with Assad. They're also talking about opening their embassy in Damascus again. Very, very interesting. So, remember we talked about Italy is now calling for the end of sanctions against Russia? Italian minister gets bullets and the threats in a letter signed by ISIS. Italian Justice Minister Andrea Orlando received bullets and a threatening letter on Thursday written in Arabic purporting to be from the so-called Islamic State, a ministry spokesman has said. She said the letter was signed ISIS and basically said, we will come to Rome and cut off your head. Really, going to come to Rome and cut off your head. This is, of course, remember, like we said, right after Italy said that they wanted to end the sanctions against Russia. Spanish lawmaker urges the EU to restore strategic relationship with Russia. Now it's Spain. So we've got France made the first move, and then, of course, we had the Friday the 13th attack in Paris. Now we have Germany, Italy, and Spain. So I'm just going to put a little call out there and say, you may be watching for false flag events in Germany, Italy, or Spain. You might just keep an eye peeled, because that's kind of very leading considering where history has taken us with France. So apparently, I think Putin may have had a few strong words with the IMF, because the IMF announced yesterday that the IMF now recognizes the Ukraine's contested $3 billion debt to Russia as a sovereign debt. The IMF's decision automatically came into effect on Wednesday evening, as no objections to treating the debt as sovereign had been voiced. Putin had earlier ordered that a lawsuit be filed against the Ukraine if it failed to pay its debt within a 10-day grace period following the deadline. So, well, guess what? Ukraine defaulted on its debt today. And it's really funny because now the Ukraine's threatening to sue Russia. Because they're going to sue Russia for this debt. I'm not quite sure how that one works. And I read the documents and still don't understand how they think that one's going to work. Kiev has imposed a moratorium on the $3 billion Russian debt repayments to the country's prime minister at a cabinet meeting on Friday. The announcement comes ahead of the December 20th deadline for the debt repayment. Now, this is good. Considering that Russia has refused, despite our efforts, to sign an agreement on restructuring and to accept our proposals, the cabinet is imposing a moratorium on payment of this debt. Of course, in November, if you remember, we covered the fact that Russian President Putin offered a 3-year restructuring plan to Kiev for this debt, provided that loan guarantees were made and set in place by the US, the EU, and the IMF. Under the offer, Russia would forego payment for this year, and Kiev would pay $1 billion a year for the next 3 years, which is kind of generous, really, all things said and done. But if you remember correctly, we talked about this back in November, that the US absolutely refused to guarantee the debt. So that's an interesting little twist too, don't you think? Now, after all this bullshit with Turkey and Russia and all of that stuff, Russia has now set up a rather impressive air defense system in Syria. And basically Putin's response was, go ahead, Turkey, fly over Syria now. Double dog dare you. He also called Erdogan an ass kisser, which I thought was a nice touch personally. And of course we have the downed Russian jet that Turkey shot down, and the black box. And we're all, oh God, you guys know how much I love talking about all these black boxes that never seem to work. I don't know, maybe they should make them out of Syrian passports. It might work better. So they opened it in Moscow. The memory card, so it basically says the black box was officially, first of all, officially opened. Does that mean there was an unofficial opening prior to that? Just saying. Was officially opened in Moscow on Friday in front of journalists and diplomats. Oh, head of Russian investigation said the flight information appeared to be missing. Oh, is anyone shocked? Because I don't know about you, but I wasn't really all that shocked. Because, the flight data is missing again. The black box didn't work. Who had the black box before Russia got to open it in Moscow? I do believe it was Turkey. I don't know. Interesting, though. I'm not saying it's true, just saying it may have been Turkey who had the black box. Now, Turkish troops are now running around in the Kurdish city of Salopi, raiding civilian houses, dragging people out of their houses, shooting people, apparently. They even apparently arrested a Kurdish MP, one of those guys who was elected in Turkey, democratically elected. Yeah, they arrested him in his house and kicked his door down, all that kind of stuff too. Oh, the stuff Turkey's doing. And then this, in a dramatic reversal, US Vice President Biden calls on Turkey to withdraw its troops from Iraq. Yes, Zero Hedge says it has been a strange 2 days for the US foreign policy. Yeah. Just a bit of a strange 2 days. I'm telling you, Strange things are afoot at Circle K. And another quieter announcement leaked out some unofficial sources that Ankara, Turkey, will have to defend itself as the Pentagon has second thoughts. But we're going to pick up our fighters from Turkey. So the Pentagon's removing its F-16s that it left there in Turkey. And if you remember correctly, the US and Germany removed their air defense missile systems from Turkey in September. So I don't know. I think that if Turkey is planning on invading Russia, and they're expecting NATO to back them up, I have a feeling they might be just leading the charge all by themselves. And that would be damn funny to watch. But I didn't say that. This was hysterical, and yet, a little piece of transparency, because you got to look at what's being said. Islamic State, this is an announcement out of the US. Islamic State oil is going to Assad and some to Turkey, US officials say. The Islamic State militants have made more than 500 million trading oil with significant volumes sold to the government of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, and some finding its way to Turkey. Now, first off, let's just look at the fact of, okay, wait. Reuters wants us to, and the US spokesperson, official White House guy, wants us to believe that ISIS, who has invaded Syria and taken over the Syrian government's oil fields and is stealing the Syrian oil, is then selling it back to Assad, and Assad is actually buying the oil from the terrorists who he's bombing, who are stealing his oil in the first place. Because that's really perfectly logical. But the most important part of it is that they say in the article that the US knew that this illegal oil was being moved. So exclude the part about going to us, being bought by Assad and some to Turkey. Basically, the US just admitted that they knew that Turkey was buying ISIS oil. So, you know, you got to look in between all the fucking bullshit disinformation to get the nuggets of gold that they like to leave behind like breadcrumbs. On the same day, no less, on the same day, Libya's rival political factions sign a deal to form a unity government. As backed by the United Nations, they all work together. They were all in here apparently in Morocco. The hopes that divided, war-ravaged Libya can pull itself together and fend off advancing Islamic State extremists soared on Thursday as the country's rival faction signed a UN-brokered deal to form a unity government that is meant to bring about peace. Because the only problem was, not all of the Libyan contenders for government were actually there. The speakers of two parliaments, Tripoli-based, I'm not even going to try and say the name, sorry guys, were not at the Morocco ceremony. The two, who are seen by analysts as hardliners, held talks on Tuesday in Malta to forge a separate deal without the UN involvement. And it gets better because the same day that they're, oh, look at this wonderful peace deal the UN managed to put together in Libya, even though it has no meaning because it didn't bring all the political factions together. US Special Forces ops arrive in Libya, get off the plane, all kitted out with their automatic weapons and the whole night vision gear, the whole bit, only to be told by the Libyan military, not sure which one, but one of the Libyan militaries, yeah, I don't think so. Get the fuck out of here. Pentagon sources confirmed to NBC News that the Special Forces unit was part of a mission sent this week, but it was unclear if the soldiers had left the country yet. Now, what is even better is this one, because I love the American media. American media reporting US commandos accidentally show up in Libya and then immediately leave. And they try to basically say, like, oh, it was just a mistake. They didn't know which government in Libya they were responding to, but they just showed up. But it was an accident, so they left. And yet NBC just said they don't know if they've actually left the country. So they left that airfield, but you know, where'd they go? Inquiring minds want to know. And this was with all the bits and pieces about Saudi Arabia and the fact that even the IMF has said that Saudi Arabia is going to be bust-ass broke in the next 10 years, and the fact that they had to print their own bonds for the first time this spring to support the war in Yemen, which they've spent $100 billion on so far this year. The role of the Saudi-led military alignments puts to question some members reject participation. So Saudi Arabia basically held a big powwow peace meeting, and they basically were forming our own coalition to fight ISIS. And then they announced the names of 34 countries who were all in that coalition with them, except that Pakistan only found out that they were in this coalition when they heard it on the news. Malaysia has also denied that they're taking any part in this military alliance. Indonesia is skeptical at best about this military alliance. And apparently even Washington seems rather puzzled in terms of how this coalition's operations would work. So, yeah, what's Saudi Arabia doing? Because I'm confused, and apparently I'm not the only one, because even other world leaders can't seem to figure this one out. The big news today, over 30 Iraqi soldiers are killed in a US Air Force strike, with 20 others injured. 30 soldiers of the 55th Brigade of the Iraqi Army were killed and 20 more injured in a US airstrike. You mean like the US airstrike against the Syrian army last week? The 55th Commando Brigade Special Troops Battalion, who apparently have been fundamental in beating ISIS in Iraq. And the US just happened to, I don't know, do an airstrike on right where they happen to be standing. Yes. Now, again, you know, the ridiculous one-sidedness of the bullshit, you know, like we had the Paris false flag attack when, you know, these people were killed, all the people killed in Paris, and everyone on Facebook had to put the little French flag over their faces to show their solidarity and their love for Paris. And I said at the time, oh really, what about the 250 people who'd just been killed in Mali? How come no one had a Mali flag on their Facebook to show those people? Well, last weekend, the Nigerian army killed 1,000 Shiite Muslims over 2 days in 2 religious buildings and arrested the religious leader of the Shiite Muslim faction in Nigeria. 1,000 people mowed down in cold blood by the Nigerian army. And yet I don't hear the mainstream media talking about it. I don't see anyone on Facebook with the Nigerian flag over their faces, you know, in solidarity and in remembrance of all the innocent people killed in Nigeria. I just want to say, yeah. Does anyone else see the problem with this? Because I kind of see the problem with this, and it's kind of really disgusting and sickening that people fall for this bullshit every fucking time on Facebook. Wow. So guys, that's the crazy, insane world that we live in at the moment, where everything can change on the drop of a dime at any moment in time. And right now, there's some radical shifting going on in allegiances. And I have a feeling that January could be a very, very, very interesting month. But that's for another report. We'll talk about that in a few more days. So that is our Transpicuous News update for December 18th. All done. And I will be back when the world gets insane again. You know, I don't know, like 48 hours, 72 hours, because that's about what they're running at right now. Okay, everyone, I'll talk to you later. Bye.
Transpicuous News, connecting the dots between the lines.